Hello YouTube. The Elder Scrolls universe is full of interesting factions, and one of my personal favorites by far is the Dawnguard, the faction of vampire hunters that we can join in Skyrim's Dawnguard DLC. And today I wanted to take a bit of a look at the Dawnguard's backstory, explore what we know about their origins and what we can actually say about the original Dawnguard, the one that was originally housed in Fort Dawnguard and that Isran based the modern Dawnguard on. Their story is quite a bit darker and sinister than most people know, and we'll explore it all and more in this video, after the intro. So, the Dawnguard. The Dawnguard that we see in Skyrim is a faction of vampire hunters founded by Isran, a former member of the Vigilance of Stendarr, who are a militant order of priests of the God of Mercy, founded just after the Oblivion Crisis that tried to rid Tamriel of the Daedric cults and other abominations like vampires, werewolves and other beasts, but their focus is very much on the Daedra. Now, in his time as a Vigilant of Stendarr, Isran found himself often disagreeing with the provincial leadership of the organization, thinking that their focus on combating the Daedra and Daedra worshippers was all wrong, and that it wasn't the Daedra that needed their focus, but rather the vampires that posed the greatest threat to Tamriel and her people, according to him. Now, him having this view is actually quite logical, as according to the official strategy guide, Isran actually lost his entire family to vampires before joining the Vigilance, likely joining in order to combat the vampires and take revenge. So him being obsessed with vampires really isn't that strange if that's true. But you see, there's something that you actually need to understand about Isran, especially young Isran from his time as a Vigilant of Stendarr, likely just after losing his entire family. Because Isran was, and often still is, very much a shoot first, ask questions later kind of guy, and in addition to that he is quite quick to anger, and is also very much a my way or the highway kind of guy who is willing to sacrifice anyone and everything if it means stamping out evil, especially vampires. This leads to him often pissing off people who try to help him or even agree with him on most things but then fall out with him for one reason or another. We actually see this later on when he recruits people for the modern Dawnguard, when nearly everyone on Isran's recruitment list is pissed off at him for one reason or another, and would not work with him under normal circumstances. Actually, this really reminds me of those Pirates of the Caribbean scenes where Jack Sparrow meets old acquaintances and they're all pissed off for some reason or another.
Scarlet! Not sure I deserve that.
Anyway, now, during his time as a Vigilant of Stendarr, he kept trying and failing to convince the leadership of the vampire threat, and over the course of this process he became ever more disillusioned with the Vigilants, coming to think of them as soft and short-sighted fools, who may have their heart in the right place but who are far too short-sighted for their own good. And eventually, things seem to have come to a head when, probably during some of his travels as a Vigilant, Isran found the ruins of the ancient Fort Dawnguard in the hidden Dayspring Canyon in the Rift. Isran likely was amazed by this well-hidden yet extremely robust fort, and according to the Skyrim board game's canon Dawnguard expansion, when he found the fort he tried to convince Keeper Corset, the leader of the Vigilance of Stendarr in Skyrim, to move the headquarters of the Vigil of Stendarr in Skyrim from the small and badly fortified and extremely exposed Hall of the Vigilant to Fort Dawnguard, where they would be much better protected against outside threats. Now, Keeper Corset refused, saying that the fort was so badly ruined that it was a fool's errand to try and restore it, and likely figured that the cost of the manpower would mean that there would be less vigilance on the road to actually battle Daedra and other abominations, so she refused. And at this point, Isran officially left the Dawnguard. Sources kinda conflict on whether or not he was thrown out for being an extremist troublemaker or if he left himself, but the outcome was the same, as he and another guy named Salen, one of the eventual founding members of the Dawnguard, left the Vigilance of Stendarr and went out to Fort Dawnguard to try and rebuild it. But as often happens with anyone who tries working with Isran, the two split up after a while, leaving Isran in the ruins of Fort Dawnguard all alone. And as such, he started to rebuild it. From his former friends we learn that he jealously guarded the ruined fort, keeping out everyone while slowly clearing out the rubble and rebuilding the fort so it could one day serve as the headquarters for another organization, a better organization than the Vigilance of Stendarr focused on dealing with the vampires, the Dawnguard. And to be honest, his obsession with this fort in particular was quite logical, as not only was it a very well hidden and protected place, about 1,000 years ago it had been home to yet another faction, the original Dawnguard, the Dawnguard that Isran named his Dawnguard after. Now, you need to understand that the old Dawnguard from way back in the Second Era, likely from somewhere after the playtime that we have in the Elder Scrolls Online, was very different from the new Dawnguard, and likely a bit more sinister. You see, in the official records and legends that are remembered by the locals, Fort Dawnguard was originally built somewhere in the Middle Second Era, somewhere after the events of the Elder Scrolls Online, most likely at least. Back then it was built and financed by the Jarl of the Riftfrom at the time, who is possibly Jarl Dawnguard if it was built close to our playtime in the Elder Scrolls Online. Now, this Jarl, according to the legends, had a son who was a very adventurous type, but as often happens to adventurers, he encountered some misfortune and became infected with vampirism. When the Jarl discovered this, he could not bring himself to kill his son, but he also did not want to have a vampire loose in the hold who could prey on his people. So instead, he had Fort Dawnguard built, a fort designed as a comfortable prison for his vampiric son, where he could be kept alive yet guarded permanently in order to prevent him from threatening the hold. The Jarl then hired a band of warriors who he had stationed at the fort to guard his son, prevent him from escaping, but likely also to protect him from vampire hunters and the like. It seems that at this time the Jarl likely kept his son's condition a secret, but with the public only being told that those men stationed in the fort were vampire hunters and were named the Dawnguard, and then entering local legend as vampire hunters. I wouldn't even be surprised if the Jarl masqueraded his son as the leader of this band, but we don't have any lore on that, so that's just speculation by me. Now, interestingly enough, this part of the story is what all the legends seem to agree upon. The Jarl's son got infected with vampirism, and the Dawnguard was a band of warriors hired to keep him in the fort while masquerading as vampire hunters. What the legends don't agree on is what happened next. You see, Isran, and likely a lot of the people who remember the legends about the original Dawnguard, believe that at some point the Jarl's son became such a powerful vampire that the original Dawnguard were forced to put him down. This would have then led to them being banished from the Rift by the Jarl, who was less than pleased for them killing his son. But despite being banned, in secret the Dawnguard members would still dedicate themselves to protecting Skyrim from vampiric threats until they eventually found their own graves. That's very much the pervasive and very heroic legend about the Dawnguard that most people seem to know, but it seems that this old group was significantly less heroic than at least Isran and some of the locals believe. You see, it's known that they seem to have hoarded rare and powerful weapons at the fort, and that they were very secretive and were feared by the local population, as they would raid, pillage and loot any place where they even suspected vampires to live, or perhaps even claimed that vampires lived as a justification for looting houses and villages. And in yet another version of events, the Dawnguard, whilst starting out as guards of the Jarl's son, actually became enamored by the powers that the Jarl's son got as a result of his vampirism. This then led them to all willingly infect themselves, leading to the original Dawnguard becoming a vampire clan which had to be driven out of the fort by the Jarl's men and then hunted and put down over the years following. Now, which version of events is true? We don't know. Might be one of them, or might be a mix of all of them. I personally believe that the story about them becoming vampires is likely, as we know that some of the more sinister interrogation equipment of Fort Dawnguard seems to have already been there when Isran arrived, which seems to be kind of the tools that vampire clans would use, but it's also possible that Isran brought those, as he's, well, very much a person who does not, mind-enhanced interrogation. So it's very much possible for any of the other legends to be true, or again, a mix of all of them. Knowing the Elder Scrolls universe, I think that at least the heroic story isn't fully true, but hey, let me know in the comments what you believe about the original Dawnguard. However, we do know that the legend about them being heroic is the one that persists in public memory, likely spread by the Jarls of the Rift in order to not lose face over the incident. And this legend then persisting would lead Isran to found his own version of the Dawnguard at the fort when he was finished reconstructing the fort into a habitable state. Now, we know that this new version of the Dawnguard are definitely dedicated vampire hunters, and the organization exponentially grew after the vigilance of Stendarr were caught off guard and their headquarters in Skyrim was burned down by the vampires. You as the player then join the organization and assemble a ragtag group of good doers to join them, among which a Dwemer-obsessed weapon scientist, a madman who tries to tame any creature, leading to tamed armored Dawnguard trolls, which is probably my favorite part of the Dawnguard expansion, not gonna lie, and a crazy priest who thinks he can talk to a god. Combine that with Isran and some more minor members and you have the organization that you either help or destroy during the Dawnguard questline. And that is the backstory of the Dawnguard, and I sincerely hope that you enjoyed this video and that I managed to teach you something new about the Elder Scrolls lore. And if I did, why not give the video a like or one of those hype boost things? It would really help the channel out. By the way, if you need a new notebook for, lore notes or study notes, I happen to sell Imperial knowledge lore notebooks. Look, I'm doing things like this with it, but you can use it for normal notes or something else. Okay, mandatory March plug over. Look in the description or in the top comment for a link to the store. And now all that's left for me to be done is to thank my top Patreon supporters: Goblark, Bernardo Binda, Gabriel Binda, Volcure of Argonia, RB Dash, Lexicon, Polycom, Sir Otter, Sword of Bushido, Rakai, Mike Willis, Dodo Komodo, James Lynch, Barademas, and Kalakranz. These people, along with all the amazing people on screen, are my Patreon supporters and my YouTube members, and they keep this channel alive. And for that, I am very grateful. Alright, see you in the next lore video. Bye bye.